My fiancé wrote from Vegas. I slept with my ex. We're trying again. I'll keep the ring. So I forwarded the $50,000 invoice, and then. It was a Saturday morning when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I was halfway through reheating leftover pasta, thinking about the week ahead, when I saw her name, Tessa. She'd been in Vegas for 3 days with her friends. The text preview showed only one sentence before the rest cut off. I opened it, expecting a selfie or some harmless update. Instead, it felt like a punch right in the throat. She said she had slept with her ex, that they were trying again, and that she'd keep the engagement ring. No apology, no explanation, just a short, brutal statement from the woman I had spent the last 4 years building a life with. For a long moment, I stood there, phone still glowing in my hand, the sound of the microwave beeping somewhere behind me. The next few minutes passed in a haze, disbelief first, then something colder taking over. I called her immediately, not because I needed to hear her voice, but because I wanted to know whether she had the courage to confirm it out loud. She answered on the third ring. Laughter and club music bled through the background. Then I heard a man's voice, deep, too close, unmistakably cold. He was the same guy she'd dated years ago, the same one who once tried to pick a fight with me outside a restaurant when Tessa and I first started seeing each other. He'd called me the safe option back then. I'd ignored it. That morning, I didn't say much. I didn't shout. I didn't even ask why. I just listened to her breathe, heard her whisper something to him, and hung up. Something inside me snapped into focus. By evening, I was booking a last-minute flight to Nevada. It wasn't about winning her back. It wasn't even about closure. It was about looking her in the eyes and giving her what she had earned, not a reaction, but a reckoning. When I landed in Vegas, the desert air carried the faint smell of alcohol and perfume even inside the terminal. I didn't sleep that night. I waited in the hotel lobby where her group was staying, the same one she'd tagged in her Instagram stories the night before. At 7:30 a.m., she walked in, sunglasses on, hair tangled, wearing one of my shirts as a makeshift top, the same one she'd packed by mistake. She froze when she saw me. The surprise on her face wasn't guilt, it was irritation. Like I'd ruined her morning. I didn't say a word at first. I just handed her a folded document, an invoice for $50,000. It was every cent I had invested into her business, a boutique wedding planning company that we had launched together under my financial backing. My name was on every contract. The LLC was filed under both of us, but she'd convinced everyone it was hers alone. Her expression shifted when she saw the document. She glanced around, realizing people were watching. She whispered something about me making a scene, but I stayed calm. I told her she could keep the ring, but not the company. That got her attention. She hadn't realized I still had access to the business account. I told her that as of that morning, I had withdrawn my investment, frozen the credit card, and initiated a request to transfer ownership. I could see the moment it hit her. The color drained from her face. She mumbled something about not meaning for it to happen this way. I could almost laugh at the irony. It was happening exactly the way she had planned it. She just hadn't expected me to move faster. I turned to leave. That's when Cold appeared from the hallway, shirt half-buttoned, looking like the kind of man who believed smirking counted as confidence. He stepped forward like he wanted to prove something. I didn't flinch. I looked him up and down, then told him calmly that his new girlfriend's company was now under legal dispute and that I'd already informed my lawyer. He blinked, clearly not following. Tessa looked like she wanted to disappear. I didn't give either of them the satisfaction of more conversation. I walked out into the blinding morning heat, left the hotel behind, and didn't look back. Back in my rental car, I checked her business email, something she had forgotten to lock me out of. Dozens of unread messages filled the inbox, pending orders, upcoming events, vendors asking for invoices. I forwarded them all to my attorney with a short note summarizing the partnership status and financial contributions. By the time I landed back home that evening, I'd already received a confirmation email that her business credit line had been suspended. I spent the night sorting through every receipt, every payment, every tax form we'd filed together. The total came to just under $50,000, and every transaction traced back to my name. She might have been reckless enough to cheat, but she had been careless enough to leave a trail. The next morning, she started calling. First 3 times, then 6, then 10. I ignored every one. Her voice messages switched from anger to pleading. She said she'd made a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that she was drunk and emotional. None of it mattered anymore. The person she'd been pretending to be no longer existed, and I wasn't about to feed her new performance. That afternoon, I got a text from one of her friends, Maya, who'd stayed behind in Vegas. She said Tessa had spent the night crying in the lobby after I left, saying I'd taken everything. I almost replied that I hadn't even started. Later that night, I went through her social media out of curiosity. Her engagement photos were still up, the captions untouched. But one new post caught my attention, a story she'd shared just hours after I'd walked out. A boomerang clip of her clinking glasses with Colt, captioned, "New Beginnings." That's when I realized this wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about reputation. She thought she'd humiliated me in front of everyone who'd watched our relationship unfold online. The friends who'd called us couple goals, the family members who'd said I'd finally found the one. She had no idea what was coming. I spent the rest of the night preparing something simple but effective. I compiled screenshots of her message, the business invoices, and her bank transactions that tied my money directly to her startup launch. I saved them all into a single PDF file labeled Invoice and Separation Notice. At dawn, I attached it to an email address to her business partners and key vendors with a single line of text. Effective immediately, all financial and operational responsibilities of this company are transferred to me under Contractual Clause 7.2. All prior arrangements made under Tessa's direction are suspended pending legal review. Then I pressed send. The first reply came 15 minutes later. One of her main clients, a high-profile event planner, thanked me for the clarification and mentioned that Tessa had already been late on several payments. Another forwarded screenshots of her bragging in group chats about cashing out soon. It was worse than I thought. By noon, half of her clients had pulled their contracts. Her brand account went private. I didn't need to post anything, explain anything, or justify a single move. The paperwork spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. When I checked my phone again, her last message said she was coming home to talk. I stared at it for a while before locking the screen. The confrontation had already happened. What came next would only deepen it. Because I still hadn't told her the most important part, the LLC wasn't registered in both our names. It was in mine alone, and she was about to find out exactly what that meant. Tessa arrived at my house that evening, uninvited, dressed like she'd come straight from an airport runway instead of a hotel meltdown. I saw her through the window before she even knocked. Oversized sunglasses, flawless makeup, the same diamond ring catching the last bit of sunset light. I opened the door, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to watch her try to control the damage. She walked in without waiting for permission, like it was still her home. She started talking before I could say a word. She said things like, "I made a mistake," and "it didn't mean anything," as if the entire betrayal could be packaged into a few weak phrases. But what stood out most was how she still acted like the situation could be managed, as if it were just another PR problem for her business. I let her talk until she ran out of words. Then I told her she no longer had a business. She laughed, thinking I was bluffing, until I showed her the email chain from that morning, the one where her vendors had already confirmed cancellation of upcoming events. She reached for my phone, trying to read the messages. I didn't let her. I told her the LLC had always been under my name. I told her the accounts were frozen, the credit cards canceled, and her business website locked pending audit. She stared at me, genuinely confused. She thought she'd been clever setting everything up using my capital, thinking she could later remove me quietly once things grew. But she'd never checked who actually filed the paperwork. She left that night furious, slamming the door so hard that the picture frames rattled. I stood there, feeling nothing but exhaustion. The next morning, the internet woke up to something wild. A friend texted me a screenshot from a wedding forum. Tessa had posted a statement claiming she was moving on from a toxic relationship and relaunching her brand under a new name. She even hinted that I had emotionally manipulated her into staying. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. 2 hours later, I got a message from Maya, her friend from the Vegas trip. She said Tessa had been bragging at the bar that she'd found a way to get free capital from me and move up in the world. Maya didn't like what she heard, so she recorded part of it on her phone. She sent me the clip. The audio wasn't perfect, but her voice was unmistakable. She was laughing about how easy it was to convince me to invest, how she'd keep the ring because, in her words, "It's not like he can take it back." I saved that recording and said nothing. That night, I got an idea. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was accountability, the kind that leaves a mark. I logged into her company group chat, the one where all her clients and vendors communicated. I was still an admin. I uploaded the invoice she'd ignored, the message she'd sent from Vegas, and the recording Maya had shared. I didn't add any caption, didn't make any dramatic statement. Just those 3 pieces of evidence. Then I logged out. By morning, chaos had broken loose. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, missed calls, screenshots. Clients had pulled out. Sponsors demanded refunds. Her business account's follower count was dropping by the hundreds. At 10 a.m., her post disappeared. So did her profile picture. But the screenshots had already circulated everywhere. TikTok, Reddit threads, even local business pages. Her new beginning turned into a public dissection of everything she'd done wrong. That same afternoon, Colt posted a photo of himself on Instagram, standing next to a new truck with a caption about fresh starts. The comments were brutal. People had already connected the dots. He deleted his post within an hour. It didn't stop there. The wedding community, the one Tessa had built her reputation around, started posting warnings about her brand. Past clients came forward with complaints, some saying she had overcharged, others that she'd reused old designs. What had taken her 2 years to build collapsed in less than a day. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my office, watching the storm unfold quietly. My coworkers had no idea what was going on. To them, it was just another normal day. But inside, it felt like watching a domino chain that I'd spent months unknowingly setting up finally crash into itself. By that evening, my lawyer called. He said we might have a problem. Apparently, Tessa had taken a personal business loan 6 months ago, under my name. She'd used my credit information to secure $50,000, claiming I was her co-founder. My signature was forged. That was the moment the story turned from personal to legal. We moved fast. I filed a fraud report that night, sent every piece of evidence I had. The bank records, the business registration, the messages, even the flight receipts showing she'd been in Vegas during the time of the forged documents. Within 48 hours, the financial institution froze her loan account and started investigating. Tessa must have realized what was happening because she showed up again, this time outside my office, crying in the parking lot. Security had to escort her away. She screamed something about me, ruining her future. It didn't matter anymore. She'd built her future out of lies, and all I'd done was stop funding them. Then something unexpected happened, the first major twist that even I didn't see coming. The police showed up at her hotel in Vegas that same week, while she was still there with her friends. Apparently, the fraud department had moved faster than usual, flagging the forged signature as part of an active financial crime. She was questioned right in the lobby while she was filming a live video titled Freedom Weekend. People caught the footage on their phones. I saw the clips online before she even called me. She was trying to explain herself to the officers, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that her fiancé, meaning me, was confused. The irony was so thick it almost felt staged. When she finally called, her voice was calm but sharp, that professional tone she always used when cornered. She said she was willing to negotiate if I'd stop escalating things. I told her everything had already escalated beyond either of us. She hung up. The next morning, the first official letter arrived from the bank confirming the investigation. They mentioned potential criminal charges if she couldn't prove authorization. She must have panicked because she started calling everyone, clients, relatives, mutual friends, spinning new versions of the story. That's when her cousin, someone I barely knew, reached out. He sent me screenshots of a group chat where Tessa was laughing about how she'd played me like a sponsor. It was the same smugness she had shown in Vegas, only now she was alone in it. Even her own family had turned away. By the end of that week, she deleted every trace of her business online. Her Instagram disappeared. Her website went dark. But the damage was permanent. Screenshots lived longer than apologies. For me, things started to settle into a strange calm. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't posting anything. I just focused on cleaning up the legal mess she'd left behind. I'd already spoken with my attorney about reclaiming the remaining assets under my name, including the event inventory she'd purchased. Everything she had built on my investment was now subject to recovery. Late one night, as I was sorting through the last of the financial records, I found something that made me pause, a message from Maya, timestamped from 2 days after the Vegas trip. She wrote that Tessa had been planning the breakup for months, that she'd told her friends she just needed one big weekend to make it easier to move on. Apparently, she bragged that Colt was her final test before committing to me fully, as if loyalty was a concept you could experiment with. Reading that message, I finally understood how deep the manipulation went. The next step wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about clarity. If she wanted to rebuild her life on lies, I was going to make sure every lie cost her something real. Because this wasn't over yet. Not even close. The silence after the public collapse didn't last long. Within a week, the phone started ringing again. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs, desperate messages. I ignored most of them until one name appeared on my screen that made me stop. It was Maya, the same friend who had sent me the Vegas recording. Her voice was quiet when I picked up, the kind of tone people use when they've seen something they shouldn't. She said she needed to meet in person. We met at a small cafe outside town, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. Maya looked drained, like she hadn't slept in days. She slid a folder across the table, her hand trembling slightly. Inside were printed screenshots, group chats between Tessa and her friends. Lines of messages where Tessa bragged about how she'd tested me, how she wanted to upgrade before marriage. The most disturbing part was a list. It was a handwritten checklist labeled exit plan. At the top, find way to push Ryan out of business. Next, get Colt to Vegas. Make it public. Force breakup. And under that, file for half of business after split. Cry if necessary. Each line was dated weeks before the trip. I didn't feel shock anymore. It was something colder, like a quiet acceptance of just how far she planned it. Maya said she couldn't keep quiet after reading it. Apparently, Tessa had been laughing about it during their girls' night before Vegas, saying that if things went wrong, she could spin the story her way online. I thanked Maya, paid for her coffee, and left. That evening, I drove straight to my lawyer's office. I handed him the folder, explained everything, and told him to proceed with every legal option available: fraud, misappropriation, and defamation. He didn't even hesitate. The next morning, the papers were filed. 2 days later, Tessa's lawyer called me directly. She wanted to resolve things privately. I didn't agree to anything. I knew what that meant. She wanted time to hide evidence. But that door was already closed. That same night, I got another call, but not from her. It was from a woman I'd never met before. She introduced herself as Camille, Colt's wife. The pause that followed was long enough to feel unreal. She said she'd found my number from one of the public threads about the Vegas situation. Her husband had come home acting strange, defensive, and then confessed to everything after she confronted him. Camille wasn't calling for gossip. She said she was planning to sue both of them, Colt for adultery and defamation, Tessa for damaging her business reputation. Apparently, Camille ran a small marketing agency that had partnered with Tessa's company months earlier. When the scandal exploded, Camille's clients pulled out too. That was twist number 3, the moment everything turned from personal betrayal into a full legal storm. Camille asked if I had proof of Tessa's involvement in the fraud and business misrepresentation. I told her I had everything she needed. By morning, my lawyer and hers were in contact. Together, they built a joint civil case that connected every thread, from the forged loan, to the falsified invoices, to the business meltdown that followed. When Tessa found out, she lost control. She started showing up at places I frequented, my gym, my office parking lot, even my building lobby. Each time, she tried to act composed, asking to talk things out. But there was no talking left to do. The more she tried to fix her image, the more the cracks showed. Eventually, her own family started reaching out. Her sister Lila called me one evening, apologizing for what her sister had done. She said their parents were furious. The family had mortgaged part of their property to help Tessa launch the business, believing I was her silent partner. Now they realized she had been lying to everyone, including them. Lila also said Tessa had started drinking heavily, convinced that if she could win me back, she could make the lawsuit disappear. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then another message came, this time from my lawyer. Apparently, Tessa had filed her own claim, accusing me of emotional coercion and career sabotage. She even alleged that I'd hacked her accounts. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so reckless. My attorney wasn't worried. He had timestamps, contracts, and statements ready. Still, it was enough to drag things out in court. When we finally stood across from each other in the courthouse hallway, she barely looked like the same person. The confidence, the polish, all of it gone. She was shaking, eyes bloodshot, clutching a coffee cup like it was a lifeline. She muttered something about me being cold, about how I was supposed to love her once. But love had nothing to do with this anymore. The judge reviewed everything within a few sessions. The evidence was overwhelming: screenshots, financial records, forged signatures, the recorded audio from Vegas, and even testimony from Camille confirming the joint fraud. Tessa's defense crumbled fast. By the end of it, the court dismissed her claims entirely and approved the seizure of her company's remaining assets to cover damages. Half of what she owned went straight to debt repayment. The other half, frozen for pending investigations. Camille's civil suit went through next. Colt refused to testify, reportedly leaving the state under a false name after losing his job. Tessa was left to face everything alone. The news spread quietly but fast. In local business circles, her name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how greed kills reputation faster than failure ever could. The wedding industry, once her playground, turned its back on her completely. Meanwhile, I stayed out of public sight. No interviews, no statements. I just worked, rebuilt, and focused on untangling the last of the financial damage. My lawyer suggested I could press for further penalties, but I didn't care about squeezing her dry. I just wanted finality. One night, about a month after the final court session, I got a message from Lila again. It was short, just a photo. It showed Tessa sitting alone in a diner booth, wearing a plain black coat, staring at her phone. No makeup, no friends, no audience. Just silence. Lila said she was working at a small catering place now, trying to pay off what she owed. For a second, I wondered if that photo was meant to make me feel pity. It didn't. It just felt like the world had settled itself naturally, the way gravity pulls everything back to balance after a long storm. Then, just when I thought everything was finished, another surprise came through, an email from a major event management firm. They had acquired the remnants of Tessa's company through liquidation and wanted to consult with me as part of their restructuring. They'd heard about how efficiently I'd handled the collapse and wanted to bring me in as a strategic partner. I signed the contract a week later. The irony wasn't lost on me. Her failed company had become the reason for my next success. But I hadn't seen the final consequence yet. That part came later, and it was far more satisfying than I ever expected. Because months down the line, in a new office overlooking the city, I'd look up during a meeting and recognize a familiar face walking in with a tray of folders. And that was when I realized life still had one more twist waiting. It had been close to a year since Vegas. Life had settled into something resembling peace. I'd moved to a new apartment, smaller but clean, quiet, and free from ghosts. My consulting work had grown faster than I'd planned. A few firms reached out after hearing about the chaos I'd survived and how efficiently I'd handled it. They called it crisis management. I called it experience paid in pain. Most days, I didn't think about Tessa anymore. If I did, it was the way one remembers a storm from last season, unpleasant but distant. Still, sometimes her name appeared in unexpected places. A gossip post about her failed brand. A discussion thread about business fraud in the wedding industry. Once, I even saw her face blurred in a documentary clip about influencer meltdowns. Each time, I scrolled past without stopping. Then one afternoon, an email from a corporate client came through. They were hosting a luxury event and wanted me to oversee financial restructuring and vendor strategy. The name of the company caught my attention, Silver Crest Events. It sounded familiar, but I didn't make the connection right away. I accepted the job and moved on. 2 weeks later, I walked into their office downtown for a meeting. It was a large firm, glossy floors, white walls, and the faint scent of floral air freshener that reminded me too much of Tessa's old boutique. I was sitting in a glass conference room, waiting for the executive director, when the door opened behind me. I didn't look up right away. I heard the sound of heels on tile, a hesitant step, and then silence. Something about the way the room went still made me turn around. There she was. Tessa stood in the doorway holding a file folder against her chest. Her hair was shorter now, darker, like she'd tried to erase herself. She wore a plain gray blazer, too big, borrowed maybe, and minimal makeup. For a second, she didn't recognize me. Then her eyes widened, and her whole face froze. Neither of us spoke. The executive director walked in right behind her, greeting me cheerfully, completely unaware of the tension filling the room. He introduced her as their new junior assistant, explaining that she joined just 2 weeks ago to help manage vendor records. The irony was so sharp I could almost taste it. She stood there, forced to nod politely, pretending we were strangers. Her hands shook slightly as she handed me the folder. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw the realization hit her. The company that had bought the remnants of her old business now employed her at the bottom rung. And I was sitting at the head of the table, hired to advise them on how to make that acquisition profitable. I opened the folder and began discussing logistics with her boss, keeping my voice steady. I didn't look at her again, not until the end of the meeting when the director praised me for helping the company acquire such undervalued assets. He mentioned they had purchased the failing business for a fraction of its worth during liquidation. He called it a smart deal. I knew it as poetic justice. When the meeting ended, the director left first. She stayed behind, lingering by the door as if unsure whether to speak. I gathered my notes slowly, gave her one last look, and said quietly that it was good to see she'd found work again. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I didn't wait for them. I walked out. That should have been the end. But a week later, I received an internal memo from Silver Crest confirming that the business they'd acquired, the one Tessa had once run, had turned out to be more valuable than expected. My consulting recommendations had improved its profit margins by nearly 40%. The director thanked me personally and mentioned they were rebranding the branch under new leadership. He asked if I wanted to oversee the transition. I agreed without hesitation. When I returned to their offices for the handover, I noticed her desk was empty. Her nameplate was gone. The HR coordinator mentioned that she had resigned suddenly 2 days earlier. No notice, no forwarding address. Just vanished. But that wasn't the last time I saw her. A month later, during a business expo at the convention center, I passed by a small booth tucked near the back. A catering company, low budget but tidy, handing out free samples. Behind the counter stood Tessa, wearing an apron, hair tied back, face thinner but calm. She didn't notice me at first. I stood there for a moment, just watching her hand out tiny plastic cups of lemonade to strangers. It struck me then how ordinary she looked. No camera, no audience, no brand to protect. Just a person trying to survive the wreckage she'd made. I walked away without saying anything. That, I realized, was the real revenge. Not the lawsuits, not the invoices, not even the collapse of her empire. It was the fact that I could walk past her and feel nothing. Still, there was one detail she never knew, one final twist the universe had quietly reserved. Months before the Vegas trip, when we'd been planning the engagement, she demanded a specific diamond ring. A large one, nearly $15,000. It felt excessive, but I'd agreed at the time. What she didn't know was that the jeweler was a friend of mine, and I'd asked him to swap the stone for a high-quality cubic zirconia after she started acting strange. I couldn't explain why I did it back then. Call it instinct. So when she texted me from Vegas saying she was keeping the ring, she wasn't holding a diamond. She was holding glass. That small detail always made me laugh privately whenever I thought about how she'd flaunted it in her photos. She'd gone to Vegas thinking she'd won the last word, not realizing she'd been wearing a fake symbol of everything she'd destroyed. In the months that followed, I used the profit from my consulting contracts to start my own firm, Easton Strategies, specializing in rebuilding brands after public collapse. The irony of that was not lost on me either. The first major client I took on was a bridal company, and the project went flawlessly. Sometimes, people asked about the framed check on my office wall, a reimbursement for the exact amount of $50,000, dated the day my case against Tessa was closed. I kept it there as a reminder, not of revenge, but of clarity, because the truth was, the worst kind of betrayal doesn't just expose another person, it exposes who you were willing to be for them. And once you see that clearly, there's no going back. The last I heard of Tessa came from Lila, her sister. She emailed me out of nowhere, thanking me for not retaliating publicly after everything that happened. She said Tessa was still paying off debts, working quietly, living somewhere on the edge of the city. Lila added one final line that stuck with me. She keeps the ring on her dresser. She says it reminds her of what she lost. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because by then, I'd learned the only victory that matters isn't making someone pay. It's walking away with everything they tried to take. And I had all of it back, plus more.